Okay, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us today for our keynote presentation. This is the first conference of the Service Management and IT Asset Management Specialist Group here at the BCS. As you may be aware, this group has been formed within the last year or so as we've merged together the previous Configuration Management and Service Management Specialist groups. So this is our first time of doing a conference in a virtual manner for reasons which hopefully do not need to be explained. So what we're going to be doing is this presentation is being pre-recorded with some guests who will be asking questions hopefully through the presentation. And all of the other presentations that we have will be broadcast live on GoToWebinar. So you can join in those and ask questions directly to the presenters as a part of those presentations, get those answers directly then. What we'll also be doing on the final session is doing a wrap up, where what we'll be doing is we'll be pulling together all of the lessons from the various presentations that we have, presenting those in the way that we'd normally do that as part of our conference sessions, and then we'll be having a panel debate. So we'll be using some of those lessons to drive into the panel debate and asking people there about their key takeaways to do with the theme of our conference, which is of course our workplace revolution. So what I'd like to do now is I would like to hand over to our keynote, Claire Agutta. So Claire is a well-established person within our industry. I'm sure she's far better at introducing herself than I am. So I'll hand over to you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Richard, and welcome everyone to this session. Initially, the group asked me to reflect a little bit on the events of this year and what that's meant for us as service management practitioners, as IT professionals, as software and hardware asset managers. And that's really my focus for today's presentation. We are living in interesting times. I try and steer clear of unprecedented, new normal, and all of the other phrases that feel extremely tired already. But I think this is a really welcome opportunity just to look briefly back at what's happened, but more importantly, look at the things that we can learn moving forward and how we can evolve and actually improve as organisations. This has been a significant opportunity to actually revisit everything that we do and ask the question, why do we do it like that? We've been talking about things like digital transformation for years, perhaps not giving these initiatives the attention they deserve. So now we have an opportunity to look at how technology enables our organisations, look at how we work together and operate together as human beings, and actually, hopefully, create something better and something stronger moving forwards into the future. So this has been all about expecting the unexpected this year, and one of the big changes has obviously been this shift from the face-to-face conference to the virtual event. And something that I've found when I've been presenting at these and attending these is they work so much better when everybody joins in and everybody collaborates. So I would please, if you're watching this live now, to ask you to, share some questions, share some experiences and any reflections that you have yourself into the chat window, and I'll be pausing a couple of times and Richard's going to pick those up for me. So please do get involved. For the recorded sessions, I'll be there in the chat as well, and we can have that conversation. But the shift from physical to virtual shouldn't stop the conversation. So please do kind of share your thoughts as we go through. So the first thing that really I've been reflecting on, and I suspect many organisations have as well, is what did we actually learn? I remember watching the news at the beginning of the year and seeing things about, well, something's happening in China, and thinking, oh, well, will that have any impact on us? And then this is spreading around the world, and what does that mean for us? Will it have any impact? Is it just like flu? And moving very quickly from that situation to being told by our Prime Minister that we need to stay in our houses for the foreseeable future. None of us predicted that. I think there's very few organisations that had planning scenarios in place that really prepared for that. And what we've seen immediately is that organisational resilience has been the key. Because we don't have perfectly formulated plans for this, we have actually fallen back on our people and our processes and our ability to respond. We've noticed that our dependencies are more critical than ever. The suppliers that we rely on, the connectivity that we use, and it has really highlighted how technology can actually create and resolve many of our organisational issues. So amazing things are being done with technology in order to help us cope with this situation. But equally, you know, you look at things like the UK's track and trace development system, we still see how technology can also be misapplied. So something that's come through as well, resilience is important, but another thing is relentless attention to detail. This is a scenario where we need to be in control of the pieces, and from a service management and an asset management perspective, understanding who is doing what and where and with what is absolutely crucial. So some of the things that we've maybe taken for granted in the past about our configuration management, our asset tracking, these are the things that are actually helping us to deal with this situation. And that management becomes more and more essential as the change escalates, the pace of change escalates. But I think one of the important things to emphasize as well is we don't know everything that we've learned yet, because every single habit, every pattern, every norm that we've been used to has been broken, you know, ripped up, thrown away, start again. And we need to be moving our focus now from the panic stage and the stabilization stage and looking to the future and looking at how we build back something better than what was there before. And looking at it more specifically from a service management perspective, an asset management perspective, really it's a case of adapting our processes and how we work in order to fit the new model of the organisation, because things like incident management, configuration management, they're still happening, they're still important, but we've maybe changed where the work is taking place. So where we work is different, and that has created new challenges for IT professionals. So an example there is one of my friends was doing some contract work at GCHQ, and the accepted truth there was that you cannot work remotely when you're working on this GCHQ contract. It is not secure, it is not safe. So when lockdown started, my friend was sent home, really sorry, contracts paused. But when it became apparent that actually this is a longer term scenario, suddenly, well, actually, you could work remotely and we'll figure something out. We'll get secure laptops. So where we work is changing. How we work is changing as well. We've lost that physical element. And technology has become more important in bolstering the social side of work, the interaction, the collaboration. And it's fairly widely accepted that putting people in a room together can create wonderful things. And we've seen a lot of focus in that in recent years as we move to more agile ways of working. There's been a lot of focus on post-it notes and whiteboards. Let's get in a room and chat. How do we now create that same environment with technology? When we work has changed. So a lot of people have been juggling caring commitments, childcare, perhaps limited office space that they're sharing with somebody at home, with a partner. So some of the patterns that we're used to from a service management perspective are different as well. And we've seen that with our training website. Is we used to see a sort of fairly steady Monday to Friday office hours, access patterns to the website, and that's changed dramatically too. So things like capacity management and demand management, they're becoming much more critical as well. Who we work with. A lot of our team structures have changed. A lot of people are doing different roles. So that needs to be factored in as well. And that's things like permissions, it's access. And the last thing, and maybe this isn't such an IT service management thing, but there's been a lot of questions about why we actually work as well. So many people are looking at the fact they've been doing an intensely high pressure job with a 2-hour commute each way, and they're starting to ask, is this what I want my life to look like? And again, in recent years, we've seen a lot of focus on employee experience. And for organisations that are delivering a fairly poor employee experience at the moment, they might find they start to lose people. And there is a service management element of that, because so much of what we do can make organisations either a nice or a not so nice place to work. So everything's changed, everything's a question mark. And so this is a screenshot from one of my favourite films. Everything's gone wrong. And they reflect at the end and say, what did we learn from this? And we learned not to do it again. We just don't know what we did in the first place. And I think this kind of sums up this year for me, because really we weren't necessarily prepared for this, because we never expected it to happen. So everything that we do is about learning, is about improvement, and is about hopefully keeping those essential business processes running while we build something that is ready for the future as well. So what I've done for this presentation is I've broken down the lessons that I've seen. So working with different organisations, talking to people in the industry, I've broken down the kind of the key points into 5 areas. And really my intention for this is to try and keep it quite practical, quite tangible, to give you things to think about for your own organisation. And you will, I'm sure, be going through a lot of these thought processes yourself already, but just to kind of summarise some of the key points that are coming out. But I'll just pause at this point, Richard, and just ask if there's any questions or comments so far.
Yeah, so we've had one as describing itself as the most obvious question. Do you see people returning back to working in offices, or has the way we work or the way we work changed fundamentally?
Now, this is an interesting one, and then I would be sort of coming to it later, but I think it's relevant to sort of stop and answer the question now, because what I've seen in a lot of organisations is a really kind of binary response to the situation. And it was, everybody out the office, everybody go home. And now the temptation seems to be, we either say everybody stays at home or everybody comes back to the office. And my preferred solution would be that we start to focus on creating a flexible work environment that meets people's needs, because not everybody wants to work from home and not everybody wants to be in the office. So how do we build something that allows for that flexibility? And again, this comes back to employee experience. It comes back to giving people some choice and some autonomy about how they work. Because I've been a home worker for 12 years, and it suits me down to the ground. But in that 12 years, I've got a garden office, I've got space, I've built patterns of working. But I do miss the interaction at conferences and seeing people occasionally. So I need that balance back in my life. But there's people who, maybe they're living in a smaller space. They need that ability to go to the office. So my hope would be that this is a fundamental change, but it's a change that's built around choice and flexibility, and it's not a kind of a one size fits all solution.
Okay, and just on that, just something I've seen some of my own personal experience is resistance in terms of going back, particularly
Mm,
when people have limited choices So I'm just thinking, there's certainly one individual that I've been working with who's been asked to go back to the office, and all her colleagues have got cars, but she doesn't, and she doesn't want to go on the public transport.
Ah.
So one of the points that's come up there is, um, what's the obligation of an employer? Do they actually have the right to tell you have to go back to the office after you've spent 3 or 4 months proving that you can do all of your work remotely?
Mm.
So again, if you want
And
to bounce that towards the end of your presentation, that's fine. I just thought I'd throw that out there as some food for
well,
thought and see if you've got any experience with that.
I think it's a nice segue into actually the first focus area, which is about people, and it's about looking after our people and giving them the choices, because my understanding is that employers cannot force people to go back to the office if they do not feel safe. But if you have a situation where your entire team's gone back to the office and you're the only one who's still home working, um, we've all had that experience where we've been the one person who's dialed into a meeting and everybody else is in the room, and it feels pretty horrible, to be honest. So I think I've got the point here, leadership and management. From a leadership and management perspective, that then becomes a nurturing aspect of the role, which is, if our team has changed in how and where they work, how do we nurture them, and how do we make sure that we don't lose the advantages that we all know we get from interaction within the team? Because people have been given challenges. They might be doing jobs they didn't expect to do, their work-life balance has changed significantly, and there is this kind of low-grade anxiety because the world is different as well. So it's making sure that we understand and are accepting of the fact that this has an impact on people, and it's not just about, can you do exactly what you did in the office from another location? So, if we think about the fact we were talking about resilience, resilient people, resilient organizations, the whole mental health and well-being piece is massive now. And from a management perspective, these are some quite specific tips that come from my experience of working in a virtual team for 12 years, but also from some of the organisations that I've been working with. So if you have a management role, if you lead a team, these are some of the things that you should definitely be doing. And one of the big things is, let the team choose the tools that they use to collaborate and to work together. And from an IT perspective and a service management perspective, this can be quite challenging because we don't want shadow IT popping up all over the place. But mandating something that doesn't work for an organisation or doesn't work for a team just encourages people to circumvent it. So let the team choose the tools. We've got things like Slack, Trello, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, what works for them. And from a management perspective, start focusing on outcomes. Move on from micromanagement, presenteeism. Tell your team so clearly, this is what needs to be done this week or this month or for this particular project or as part of this sprint. It's got to be about outcomes, because people will be working differently. They will be juggling the job. But like I tell my team, if the job gets done, really don't care if it means you've not worked your 40 hours. I don't care if you work at 3 o'clock in the morning, because that suits you. As long as things get done, that's what's essential. And as a manager as well, communication becomes so important, because hopefully you all know, sending an email doesn't get the message across, particularly if you've got more than 2 pieces of information in an email. People just don't process it. So it might feel, as you're communicating electronically, it might feel like you're going overboard, it might feel like overkill, but don't be frightened to kind of hammer that message home. Send it in an email, put it into the Slack, pick it up in the team meeting, because it's really easy for things to get missed when we move away from that face-to-face communication. Recognize that productivity might be different. And I think you might have seen there's been a lot on social media with people saying, this isn't what working from home is like. This is just trying to do your job in the middle of a global crisis. So be accepting and be understanding that you might not get the best work, the highest productivity from your teams at the moment, but have that trust in them. Just because you can't see them, have that trust that they're doing the job and they're going to work to the outcomes that you've given them. So the absolute no-nos from a management perspective: move on from the micromanagement. You cannot. I've heard stories of managers telling people, I want you to jump on this Zoom call at 8 o'clock in the morning to show me that you're there, and at the end of the day as well, so that I know you've been working. It's a nonsense. And be kind of cautious about mandatory fun as well. If you have a very sociable team and your team used to go out together, building that into a virtual environment and having a glass of wine on a Friday in a Zoom chat could be a really nice thing. But if that's not how you behave normally when you're there physically, don't try and enforce that in a virtual world. If you think your response to you saying, should we have a glass of wine on Friday at 5 o'clock, will be your team all rolling their eyes and saying, no, thank you, don't do it. Find different ways to build that team spirit. Expecting constant availability is a no-no as well. Another friend of mine who's working from home at the moment says she doesn't feel like she can step away from her laptop for any time at all, because as soon as she does, there'll have been a message in Slack saying, are you there? You can't expect people to, especially do knowledge work, and be constantly available and constantly interrupted. And the same with video as well. If you wouldn't normally use video on conference calls, don't suddenly expect it. Don't try and force collaboration onto people. Find ways to build it. And if you're not a manager, if you're an individual, the same rules apply. Protect your time. We, in service management, in asset management, we tend to be knowledge workers. We need uninterrupted blocks of time. So feel like you have the autonomy to turn off all your notifications and put yourself on do not disturb. If you feel a bit uncomfortable, tell the team, I'm working on something for the next 2 hours. I'll be back online after that. And think about how you communicate within the team as well, because it's not just a case of trying to replicate what you had before and create a carbon copy. So for example, there's lots of organizations of just, we used to have a team meeting, we used to chat in the office, we'll have a virtual team meeting instead. But if part of that virtual team meeting is handing out work and asking people to do things, where is their audit trail? How do they find that information easily? If you're discussing a problem and that conversation is embedded in a 30-minute video, how is that knowledge recoverable? So from a knowledge management perspective, from a knowledge sharing perspective, think about using a balanced set of technology so that the information that you're creating within the team is recoverable and is easy to find when it's needed. Then the second focus area moves on from the individual to the organisation. So this cuts across people, process and technology. And I think it was easy at the start of this to obsess about technology and just think about the technical solutions. Whereas now we're starting to understand that it's our processes that are evolving as well. And one of the biggest areas that's been affected is business continuity. This is not just an annual exercise now. This is not dusty plans in a drawer somewhere. This has become something that very much needs to be a thread running through everything that we do, and perhaps seen as part of people's role in a way that it's perhaps not been before. So there's people like Daniel Breston doing some good work talking about agile business continuity, and really that's about building the skills to respond rather than having a plan for every single scenario. And the other thing that's been really interesting to me is, I think for the last few years, and we've seen the rise of DevOps, and really the kind of the development side of the organisation has been the one that gets all the attention. It's all been about coding and engineering, and ops has maybe been forgotten a little bit. And what this situation has done is really just highlight the importance of our solid, maybe old-fashioned service management skills and capabilities. It's been ops teams, it's been incident management, service desk that have been fishing dusty laptops out of cupboards, getting people the kit they need so that they can work remotely. And I think it has kind of highlighted that yes, our ability to do agile development, our ability to get new functionality released is important, but ops is such an important organisational capability as well. And as the situation's evolved, we've then seen the development side of things come in. You know, can we build things really quickly that are going to give people extra functionality that's going to make it easier for them to work? But even then, we've seen the importance for good governance around that, because when we're rushing things out, are we thinking about the licensing implications, the scalability, the long-term fit of some of these solutions? And finally, you know, if you can't understand it, you can't manage it. So there have been some organisations that have really had it highlighted to them that they don't know what's happening and where things are. So value stream mapping, Abashi, if you've not come across Abashi before, maps data flows through an organisation. So if you can have that visual understanding of what's happening where, what technology, what teams are involved, it's much, much easier to then adjust that than it is if you have to do a discovery exercise before you can then start to make those adjustments and those refinements. Have we got any other questions now, Richard?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the first question actually sparked a series of questions that I didn't want to interrupt you immediately. And then this last section has brought some through as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump around a little bit inside them.
Okay.
So you've just been covering one that did come up earlier, which was how do you define resilience in terms of ITSM professionals and from an organizational perspective? So you talked a bit more widely around that. I was just wondering if you could give a slightly more shortened definition of resilience.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's easy to say, you know, resilience is our ability to adapt to change. Um, but for me, it's also a mindset as well. And some of this I do think highlights the benefits of having a more agile approach within the organization, because resilience is the ability to look at a problem and say, how do we respond to this? So the more bureaucracy, constraints, you know, really sort of hidebound thinking we've got in our organisation, the more difficult it is to adapt to something and say, right, you know, blue sky thinking, where do we go from here? So for me, resilience is freedom within the organisation to be really creative in responding to a problem. And one of the things that kind of made me laugh was NHS Digital. They were able to respond to the lockdown really well, because they'd just done a huge Brexit planning scenario, which involved locking all of the staff out of the office. So some of it's about the preparation that you do as well.
Okay, yeah, I really like that as a definition for resilience. And so I'm aware of a public sector organisation, someone I know works for, where basically they just got told your computer stays in the office.
Yes.
So it's like, yeah, you just do what you can from your home computer, but we're not going to give you access to the systems you need to do your job.
Yeah.
Which I think is, shall we say, it sounds to me like the direct opposite of the answer you just gave to that question. So, okay, I like
Yeah.
that one. So one from earlier, is there a danger that we focus on digital innovation for the digital elite and ignore the impact on the digital illiterate? And I think that, you know, certainly for me and you, Claire, you know, we've both been used to doing remote working for a very, very long time. So it comes sort of a second nature to us.
Mm.
But it's partly that the jobs that we have lend us to that capability, as well as the kind of people
Mhm.
that we are, as well as this concept of digital literacy. So so the question there is, is there a danger that we focus on that digital elite too strongly?
I think that's absolutely the case, and that is a phenomenal question, and I think we could spend another 30 minutes purely discussing that, because it brings us up to a sort of a broader, more societal question. And we look at things like South Korea, for example, where technology is much more embedded in society. Their track and trace was so much more effective because there was that widespread access to technology, but also that acceptance that technology is part of life. And I think in the UK society, that there are areas where people don't have access to technology. And I think this has been particularly highlighted in the education space, where there seems to have been assumption that it's possible for everybody to study from home because everybody has, enough internet connectivity and a laptop for every child within every family, which simply isn't the case. And I do think that there will be a learning gap that has come from that. And the things that I'm talking about today, I'm talking about from an IT service management lens. How do we look at our organizations and how do we do things better? But to my mind, our government, our national leaders should be having exactly that same conversation about us as a society, and that should touch everything from transport to technology to every area of how we live, and I can only hope that will happen.
Okay, so we've got several more questions, and I think some of them are still coming in. So just on the area that you've just been discussing there, we've got a comment here. Perhaps ops is missing out, like other areas, where it's a language and where we discuss them, e.g., good old-fashioned way of doing X, Y, Z. Could feel to others like we're not progressing or being stuck. We've got another point here. Great point on ops, especially in the you build it, you run it DevOps world. Our
Hmm.
focus on operability for the long term gets forgotten. If we could make the words a bit more pronounceable, that'd be appreciated. Um, and then follow up with that. The question is, what do service management professionals need to do differently in the DevOps world?
So and for those of us who've been in service management for quite a long time, I think I'm coming up 20 years now, which is a bit frightening. I think we just have to embrace the 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 changes that have come. So the rise of things like DevOps and Agile. When I first started, there was ITIL and Prince 2, and that was it really. And the development teams were the people who threw things over the wall on a Friday afternoon, and you hated them and they hated you and all that kind of thing. And really, I think the main thing now for service management professionals is to understand the benefits that we bring to the organization. So there's been this shift to you build it, you run it. There's been this shift to product teams rather than project teams, and start to finish ownership of applications and products. But there are still gaps that service management fills. And if we go back to the core principles of service management, it was always about building an IT capability that met the needs of the organization. So the evolving service management role now is about fulfilling those cross-organization needs for things like support and reactive processes like incident and problem, but also for having that advisory role, and also that kind of architectural role of, yes, we've got 50 different product teams all working on different things. Where is the glue that fits all of it together? And that's where service management really has a role. And if this situation has shown us anything, it's how essential technology is. And if we accept that technology is critical, we have to accept that we need the skills to look after it as well. And a lot of that comes from our service management capabilities. And you know, it's, again, it's a whole other subject area, but the old-fashioned things about IT being the department of no, we need to move past that and accept that if individual departments like marketing, like finance, are spending money on IT solutions, what are we doing in service management to help them make sensible decisions? So there is absolutely a role, and you've seen things like Verism that I was involved with. Verism is looking across the organisation and trying to say, how do these things fit together when you have agile development, but a business case process that's built around annual budget cycles? How do you fit all of these things together? And service management professionals need to be open to these new ideas and keep learning.
So we've got a comment that's come in as you've been speaking on that, which kind of fits to this. Why does it have to be a DevOps world or an Agile world or an ITSM world? The borders and in the hearts of these blend beautifully if people could see how the mixing of these brings greater resilience and effectiveness.
And again, I think that's absolutely true, and it comes back to what I was saying earlier about focusing on outcomes. But we do, you know, maybe this is a learning point for us in IT, is we do seem to be quite fashion led. And something new comes along, we get very excited. We say, out with the old stuff and in with the new. Why? You know, what are we trying to do? We're trying to develop IT capabilities that meet the needs of our organisation, and the frameworks, methods, tools that we use to do that should bother nobody except ourselves. So I think that's a good comment. So I'm going to get going again now, just because I
Fully
am a
agree.
little bit conscious of time, but hopefully we've got time for a few more questions at the end. And thank you to everybody who's commented so far. So focus area 3 has been supply chain. And again, what this has highlighted is nobody's an island anymore. So thinking about, who does your organisation rely on and who relies on you? So an example here is the bank that my organisation uses for business banking has outsourced a lot of its support functions to India. And what happened was the call centres in India closed, the staff were sent home, but they did not have the connectivity to work remotely. So the service was hugely affected. So for those of us that have these fairly complex supply chains, we need to understand how a situation like this can affect us. And in sometimes it can be a benefit. You know, my organisation has outsourced its support to a company in Macedonia, and the service has been fairly seamless because the connectivity is there, but also we have the ability to access additional resources if we need additional resources. So sometimes there's benefits in these complex supply chains, but again, we need to understand them. And if you've not read up on service integration and management, that's an area that can maybe provide some more detailed advice here, because it's very much about building a culture of collaboration between your suppliers. So again, a lot of organizations don't have a particularly good relationship with suppliers, and they have a one-to-many relationship as well. They haven't built that collaboration between the different suppliers that they're using. So SIAM can give you some kind of ideas and guidance around that. And then focus area 4, which is only a brief one really, but it has emphasized more than anything that for us now as professionals and as social animals as well, connectivity is life. You know, lockdown has been bearable because of the internet. It's helped us do our work. We've got things like Netflix that's kept us all going. Tiger King was the huge thing very early in lockdown that everybody was talking about. So again, from an IT perspective, it's just that focus on, how are we enabling that? What can we do as organisations? If we have staff who are in rural areas where perhaps the connectivity is not so good, how do we support them? What can we actually do? And then the final focus area is just, look ahead. The phases that we've been through, we had the panic phase, what do we do? We had the stabilization phase, okay, we've got everybody working, it seems to be going okay. Now it's looking forward and learning the lessons. Don't just hunker down and go into survival mode. Think about how we can do something better, how we can learn. Because again, in IT, we tend to be really good at being the heroes and getting through the situation. But if something else were to happen now, our staff are already close to burnout. People are already approaching the limits of what they can do. So what can we do for the future? How can we build back a better organization? And that question about, should everybody go back to the office? We need to ask ourselves, what was there before that is worth rushing back to? All of our norms, all of our patterns are based on years and years of gradual evolution. We never really stop to ask, why do we do that? And this is an opportunity to ask those questions. What should we rush back to doing? What actually can we be throwing away and looking at something completely different? And the final thought that I want to leave you with is, don't forget to tell yourself every now and then that you did a really good job. We've all had to adapt, had to change. And if you've come through that with most of the sanity that you went in with, and we've kept our businesses going as well, you should be giving yourself a pat on the back, because this has not been an easy year. And that's one not to forget as an individual, not to forget as a manager, to remind your teams that we've done a good job. And that's it from me. So you can see my contact details there. Feel free to carry on the conversation with me on Twitter, join up and connect with me on LinkedIn. And hopefully for all of us, we can build something better out of this. So that's the end of the presentation. I think we're about on time, but Richard, if you want to keep going with questions, I'm not rushed for time, so please feel free to.
Yeah, absolutely fine. Yes. So first off, Claire, thank you very much for that. That was a excellent keynote presentation, very thought-provoking, and I actually took a photo of my laptop, even though I'm sure I can find the slides. Which we did actually have a question about, can we get a copy of the slides? My understanding is we will be putting the slides for all of the presentations out onto the website as we normally do.
Yep.
But yes, your Maslow's hierarchies of needs with internet put down at the bottom is absolutely pure genius. And I certainly found that personally when my internet decided to not be as reliable as I wanted it to be during the lockdown.
Oh
Um,
no.
how that changed my whole emotional profile. Yes, does really show how much that is underpinning our world nowadays. But yeah, we do have a few extra questions that have come through, a couple of which from earlier on, which I've left in. So two here, which were asked very early on. I'm going to ask them both together and let you respond. What do you think about tools which monitor worker performance, such as looking as when you are logged on, keystrokes, etc., when you're working remotely? And then combined with that, as it's a legal one, have you come across any legal issues with staff not wanting to come back to the office?
So the first question about using that kind of invasive monitoring, I think it's disgusting, and I think it's an absolute failure of management. And what that type of organisation will find is that any kind of system like that you put in place, people will find a way to game it. Aside from the fact that you are demonstrating a complete lack of trust in your employees and a complete failure to set outcomes and manage appropriately, that just becomes a way for people to work around the system. So I'm not a fan of that type of approach at all. And then the second question, in terms of legal cases, I haven't come across anything yet, because I think for most organisations, they are not forcing people back into the office. Most of my contacts that I know who work at big organisations, their employers are looking at things like shift systems, because they cannot physically put as many people into a building as were in that building before. So I dare say we're going to see it happen. And again, we're talking from the IT perspective, knowledge workers who have the capability to work from home. There are many, many jobs where people do have to physically be present in order to carry out that role. And I think as IT people, what we need to be looking at is, where can technology actually help and enable that? So things like contactless payment are a really obvious example. So I've not seen any legal cases so far. I dare say it will come, but again, I would hope that a lot of employers are looking at this from a human perspective and trying to manage this from a human perspective, and not just looking at the bottom line.
Okay, thank you. So we've got a few other comments which have come in here. We've got a great point on cultural pressure for the others in the team in the way
Mm-hmm.
they're working or moving to a particular way, and combining with that is a question here on what about the politics of a hybrid workforce? Are those working from home disadvantaged relative to the few still working alongside the boss in the HQ or the country club?
Oh, I love it. I think yeah, I mean, this reminds me of years ago when I used to be a smoker, and it was widely accepted that the real business got done when everybody went outside for a cigarette, and it did get you access to people that you wouldn't have. And I do think it will create issues. What we need to be doing as a society, as a workforce, is learning the rules for new ways of working. So the kind of the office politics, the access to people, that way of working is built up over decades, if not centuries. What we've had now is a very significant change that's been thrust upon us. So we need to rewrite the rule book. And I was thinking about this because I was doing something about communication quite recently, and there's so much about body language and non-verbal cues and everything that assumes that you're communicating with somebody who you're sat in a room with. We need those rules rewriting for electronic communication. Most of you who are on this have probably seen how easy it is to unintentionally get the tone wrong in an email, or kind of upset somebody without meaning to, because we haven't developed that rule book yet. And that's what needs to happen, and it will happen quite quickly, because we have been forced to change how we behave. But it's going to be a case of adapting. Some people will find it more easy than others, but gradually we'll reshape those patterns. And hopefully, I quite like the idea of the country club, but hopefully we will see new kind of new ways of working and new ways of communicating that adapt to the fact that we're not all in the same physical space anymore.
Yeah, I think certainly for me, I think if you've got the politics of being close to key people,
Mm,
it seems to me that that kind of exists anyway. Do you feel like you're able to walk up to the CEO and interrupt him to ask him some question he may not be
mm,
wanted, face to face, compared to pinging him an IM? I feel like some of those barriers are very, very similar. Um,
yes.
One of the things I've certainly noticed is the formality of communication seems to have dropped quite significantly. I've certainly found that in the work that I'm doing. I've worked on projects during lockdown where people have been IMing each other
Mm,
between organisations, and making it a lot more friendly and a lot more informal than we might have done beforehand.
Yes,
And I think
and
that's been a sort of natural attempt to soften that part you're saying about, how do we read people's body language, is to be a little bit more expressive and a little bit less formal in our written communications.
I think we're seeing, with the children on conference calls and cats and dogs on conference calls, we're kind of seeing a more human side of each other presented electronically. And in that, there are ways in which that's lovely, but there will also be some people who find that quite intrusive. They don't want to bring the whole self to work. They want to still have that very clear separation. So we need to adapt to the change, and it will happen, and it will happen quite quickly.
Yeah, that brings to mind, there's a video that went viral a couple of years ago about a guy, I think he was based in Southeast Asia or something, who was doing a call on, I think it was CNN or something like that, doing some kind of a market analysis, and suddenly the kids came charging in.
Yeah,
And I can't remember if it was his wife or whether it was a carer came in and sort of ushered the kids out, and he was kind of criticized for completely ignoring the children.
yeah.
And I remember at the time thinking, but that seemed to be like the normal way to react. Whereas now it would just be like, hi, we're live. You're talking to a million people. Oh,
Yeah,
hi everyone, says the 3-year-old. And then, and I think that's been sort of quite accepted, certainly in the work that I've been doing. Um,
definitely.
but I also think it's very interesting there to think about how, so we had this point earlier about the digital literate and illiterate. I think it's very important not to get overly focused on the knowledge workers, which I understand this presentation has been focused around that area, and that's part of what we're looking to talk about, but also just to be mindful that there's more to it than that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've just had another thing come in here. Absolutely agree that monitoring employees in detail is inappropriate and won't work. However, can anonymized feedback on aggregated work patterns be useful?
Yes, absolutely. And that comes back to, I think, what we were saying about creating a flexible working environment and evolving our thinking around things like capacity and demand management. So that kind of data, I think, absolutely feeds into trends, and maybe we start to understand that actually our staff have shifted and there's more work happening in the evening, so then that affects how and when we communicate, and it affects things like systems maintenance if we still have things like that going on. It might affect the staffing that we have on the support desk. So yes, I do absolutely think that that is relevant, and it's that is part of recreating our working environment for the work that we are now doing. So yes, absolutely no issue with that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Claire. I think with that we'll leave it at that. So thank you very much for being involved in our virtual conference, and I look forward to having you back onto our panel session that we're going to have at the end of the conference,
Hmm.
and introducing more questions to you then.
Yeah, and thanks everybody for the questions today. They've been brilliant.
Okay, so on that point, we will bring the webinar to a close. Thank you very much.